After playing through the demo, I can definitely see the FromSoft influence. But make no mistake, this game has an identity all its own. Like me. Let me start off by dispelling any misconceptions here. This is not Dark Souls 4, but I would call it a Souls-like, and I think it's gonna be a pretty dang good one. Especially considering that from what I can tell, this is either a one-man project or a very small team. So if you take that into consideration, what they've accomplished here is pretty impressive. So I think the best place to start is by talking about what we know about the developer, because it's kind of mysterious, to be honest. So as you probably saw in the thumbnail, Rise of the Rebellion is being developed by a former FromSoftware dev that worked on the DLCs for Dark Souls 3, and he goes by Hytacka. At least I think he's a he, and I think he's just one person. He could also be a team of people, though. We don't really know. Which brings me to the mystery of this matter, which is that we don't really know much about him or his team, or if he even has one. You see, the only info I can find about his stint working on Dark Souls is from his own admission, because there is surprisingly little known about this mysterious game developer. We don't even know his real name, which is why we really can't confirm whether or not he actually worked at FromSoft. So he could be lying, I guess, to gain credibility or to try and boost game sales, but if that is the case, he's not doing a very good job at it. Because to Hytacka's credit, the whole former FromSoft dev thing is not what he leans into when he talks about the game. It probably matters more to us than it does to him, to be honest. Instead, Hytacka stands firm on the game's mechanics and its own merits. And after playing the demo, I gotta tell you, I can see why. So with that said, let's get into the game and why I believe it might end up being a sleeper indie hit in 2025. So visually, this game is fairly decent, especially for an indie title. It's obviously not a Ghost of Tsushima or an Elden Ring, but it's not really in that category anyway. But considering the game is made by a solo dev, or at most a very small team, the aesthetics are pretty clean. But if you are a graphics snob, you might take issue with this game a little bit, but I do think that the game looks decent enough to where even the graphics snobs will be able to have a good time with it. Now when it comes to the story, I'm going to refrain from any kind of judgment on it, since all I have played is the demo, but here is just an overview. The game is set in a fantasy world where dragons once soared the skies. Humanity now reveres the earth as a dwelling place of the gods, drawing upon a mystical energy called May that is derived from it. This energy is wielded by warriors known as Manus, who use it to enhance their combat abilities. The story follows a hero whose hometown has been invaded by foreign forces, and determined to reclaim it, you set out to confront the invaders and reclaim your home. So it seems interesting enough, but like I said, I'll wait for the full release before offering any more than just this summary. But I think it has at least potential to be decent. If you made it this far in the video, you might be enjoying it. So consider leaving a like, subscribe, and maybe even become a member to support the channel. Did you do it yet? So now let's talk about the bread and butter of every Souls-like: the combat and game mechanics. So although Hytacka allegedly worked on Dark Souls 3, this game feels much more akin to Sekiro in my opinion. First off, the combat pace is much faster than a Dark Souls game. Maybe not quite as fast as Sekiro, but pretty close to something like Bloodborne. Now for the most part, things are pretty par for the course for a Souls-like. There are checkpoints that respawn enemies and refill heals, unlockable shortcuts, lots of dodging and parrying, and of course, dogs. But there are a couple standout differences that are worth talking about, some of which could end up being the catalyst that propels this game from just another Souls-like to something unique. Let's start with something strange that I'm not sure how I feel about yet. So there is a stamina bar in Rise of Rebellion, but it doesn't act like a normal stamina bar does. Instead of being depleted whenever you take any action, it only depletes when you block an attack, which means that attacking, dodging, and parrying do not affect your stamina at all, which kind of makes you wonder if it's needed really. Now obviously this isn't the first time a game in the Souls genre allowed you to attack, parry, or dodge without using stamina. Sekiro doesn't even have a stamina bar at all. But that is what makes this so weird. It's like they couldn't decide between the Dark Souls method and the Sekiro method, so they just did both. Now an argument could be made that it is necessary in order to keep people from just perma-blocking, which was one of the purposes of the posture meter in Sekiro. I think it's just the fact that they call it stamina, so that automatically makes you think of what you are used to. But really it's more of a posture gauge than it is a stamina bar. When you think about it like that, it makes a lot more sense. But another thing that I'm not sure how I feel about is their approach to the critical attacks. So in this game you build up action points over the course of combat, which you can spend to unleash more powerful attacks. One of which is called Wrath of Earth. Now, if you hit an enemy with Wrath of Earth when it runs out of stamina, a giant rock spike will shoot up from the ground underneath it and deal big damage. This stone spike will then stay on the battlefield, and if you hit it with a heavy attack, it will explode and deal bonus damage to the enemy as long as it is still standing close to it. But keep in mind, this same system can also be used against you if you are hit with the same attack while your stamina is depleted. The reason I am not so sure about this system is that it seems to be almost needlessly complex. It is different, I'll give it that, but I'm not so sure that the more traditional critical system or just something more simple wouldn't be a better option. I want some more time with the game after full release before I make a decision either way. But the biggest standout and what I liked most about the game is its parry system. In Rise of Rebellion, you can parry attacks, much like in Sekiro. But on certain attacks, highlighted by a bright flash, you can execute a perfect parry. Now, perfect parries are nothing new, of course. But what is new is that Rise of Rebellion makes you earn them. Instead of just having to get the timing right, you also have to focus on the direction of the attack. If the attack comes from the left, you have to parry plus hit the left directional, and vice versa for attacks coming from the right. And then upon executing a perfect parry, you are rewarded with a counterattack that does some decent damage. I really enjoyed this aspect of the game. I think it adds a unique layer to the combat that gives it a fresh challenge. There are also perfect dodges that allow for counterattacks as well, although in my experience, the timing on the dodges is much harder than the timing for the parries. At least it felt that way to me. But that brings me to a small critique that I have. Although I do love the combat, I can see how it could, for some people, just be too much. There is a lot to focus on. So many different attack types and different inputs that it can feel like it is overly complex for the sake of being complex. I don't think that it is. I really like how it's set up. The extra depth in the combat to me adds something interesting and fun to experiment with. But there are many more players than just myself out there, and I worry that for most of them, this game's combat will be a lot to take in. The overall timing of the game is also a little weird and takes a minute to adjust to. So when you couple those things together, it could be a problem for the masses. But regardless, I really like it. So I'll have a link to the Steam page in the description so you can go check out the demo for yourself. It is, of course, free. I plan on following this game very closely and grabbing a copy as soon as it is available. The game has no release date as of yet, but it is set to release sometime in 2025. The only thing we know for sure is that it will release before Silksong.